Now more than ever, parents are involved in their child's college education. According to TOB, they offer input, ideas, and even help more than they did in the past decades. This is not always beneficial to them though, as it is important for college students to develop their own problem-solving abilities to help them in their life and professional career.
I think my experience with college was I kind of did everything on my own. My parents had no idea what college I was applying to. They didn't know where I was going. And financially, I was raised in a lower income household, and so anything I had to figure out was on my own. And the options were go to school and figure that out and pay for school on your own, or go into the military. And I was lucky enough to find a program that was going to help me financially.
So going to college for me was a bit of a different experience. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I'm the youngest of 12 children, so college in and of itself wasn't something that was necessarily expected, but something that I knew I needed to do. And because none of my siblings had ever gone to college and neither of my parents went to college, the whole process of applying to college, getting in college, the whole experience was something that I had to really go through on my own. And so that was a very different thing for me. So I did.
And I was the first person in my family to go to college. My grandparents didn't go to college, and my parents didn't go to college. So I really had to be take the initiative and do all that stuff on my own. So my parents weren't really able to help me with my college process. They weren't able to help me fill out the financial aid papers. I didn't know what EOP was. They had no idea. And so I was in a really good situation because I had been involved in community organizations, and that's what helped me get through my college experience. And my parents just tried to be there. So when I needed documents, they were like, okay, here, I'll find them, I'll give them to you, kind of thing.
While I was going through the college experience, my brothers and sisters, some of my older siblings were in college. My parents had absolutely no idea about the college selection process. They wouldn't have known anything. They only understood whatever my brothers and sisters were doing, going to classes, and they were all commuter students. So as the youngest of 9, and the youngest girl, I went to my very traditional parents and told them I wanted to go away to college, which they were not too happy about because no one before me had ever done that. So it was really a lot to, it was a big thing for my parents to let me go as the youngest daughter, the baby of the family, to let me go away to college.
Like I said, I come from a lower income household, and I would get the occasional $20 from my parents for my birthday or something. But I worked for the Reprographic Center from the first week I stepped onto the campus until the very last week where I graduated.
Financial support, they did what they could. I mean, they would send, $50 or $75 from time to time, and make sure that I could get home, whether they drove to pick me up because I wasn't too far away, or if there was a friend of mine that I met that was coming that way, they give the parents money for gas, and that was always really nice. And I had work study, and in the summer months I got a full-time job and saved what I could in the summer months for my full-time job to be able to help with my expenses. Like, the phone situation wasn't included in our college bill in the same way it is now for all of you. I had to do laundry, and that got expensive, So, I had to develop these strategies like...
My parents, they're poor, so it was really difficult to get financial support from them. They would scrape together money to send me every couple weeks. The first semester I didn't work because I wanted to adjust to the college environment and academics. But after that, I found myself working every semester until I graduated.
In 1998, what was different was calling your parents. I had a phone in my room. Cell phones were not a big thing, and I graduated in 2002, and still, I think there were 2 people in my class that actually had them. And so it wasn't a big thing, but it was a room phone, and if you wanted to call home, you had to buy a phone card from Walmart or from a supermarket or anything. So that was the way of talking to your parents. And where it was funny is I talked to my mom and dad. I'm 31 years old. I talk to my parents almost every day now. But in college, I probably talked to them once every week. Part of it was because it was expensive to call, and then also you had to be in your room to call. So that wasn't. I wasn't always in my room, so if they couldn't find me, they just had to wait until I called back. So answering machines extremely important at that time.
And although I kept in contact with my parents, certainly back when I went to college, cell phones was not, wasn't even something that we were remotely thinking about. As kids, you had a dorm phone or you had pay phones that you can call your parents. So I contacted my parents. Typically, I called my mom once a week just to check in, let them know that I was okay. But that was pretty much the extent of it. Neither of my parents used the computer, so there was no emailing or things that you do nowadays. Certainly, obviously, no texting or anything of that nature. So the once a week phone call was really my opportunity to talk with my parents and let them know that I was okay, and to see how I was doing in school. So for me, it was a very different experience.
When it came to talking to them or communicating with them, I was, like I said, my mother and I are very much far apart in age. So, I mean, we talked not as much as we used to. When you're living with somebody, you see them every day. That's like a lot. And so I would say back then, too, we didn't have cell phones. And we didn't have a telephone in our room that was included in our expenses, like paid for. You had to pay for that yourself, and which meant when I called from home, it was long distance and it was expensive. It was like 55, 60 cents a minute. So that really kind of dictated how often I could talk to my mother. I would be lucky if I communicated with my mother on the telephone, once every 2 weeks. You know what I mean? If I wasn't home on the weekends, and I didn't go home on the weekend a lot. But we wrote letters, which was kind of really different than how y'all do it. I'm talking about letters through the mail, where you put a postage stamp on it, you write out the address and all of that. No email, just letters in the mail. We wrote letters in the mail. So I would get letters from her about 2 times a week, and I would only write her maybe once a week.
When I was in college, I would call my mom. I would not call her every day. And I think even to this day, we would talk once a week, check in, are you okay, everything okay? And that's pretty much how it is. Obviously, when I was in college, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't even have laptops when I was in college. When I was a freshman in college, we used word processors. So in terms of communication, we actually had calling cards that we used. So, or we would just use landline phones. That's how it was those days. And so basically I would call my mom once a week. And that was mostly because it costs more money to call, whereas, we used to have local and long distance, while calling to New York City from Syracuse was considered long distance. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't talk as much. And either she would have to pay for the phone call if I called collect, or I would have to pay my calling card bill. So
I contacted my mom every day just because I need that emotional support. She basically encourages me to continue doing what I'm doing.
Text probably like 5-6 times a week. Talk once or twice a week.
You talk to your parents on your cell phone? Like maybe 2 or 3 times a week usually.
I talk to my mother almost every day.
Do I think the students today have it a little bit easier? No. I think students have their own hardships to deal with. Maybe they have some things that I just never had to deal with, because maybe that pressure of having mom and dad kind of hovering over them or being able to call them at any time, maybe a pressure my class wasn't used to.
And I think one of the benefits that maybe I experienced that students today don't experience is they don't have that opportunity to ever develop their own individual self-identity because they're always connected to the parents. There is no opportunity for separation from your parents because either they can call you, they can text you, they can email you, they can Skype you. There's all these different modes of communication with parents these days. And so in many ways, I don't think students have built up the level of resilience that I had to have in order to succeed in college. So the first time I ever saw a failing grade or a grade that I didn't expect, I had to deal with that. It was something I had to emotionally learn how to deal with. Whereas now students, the minute that something like that occurs, they call the parents, they text their parents, and so they don't have a reason to have to learn how to develop those individual skills that are so important when you go out in the real world. As an administrator now who deals with students and deals with parents, it's very, very difficult when I have to tell parents that I really need to hear your son or daughter's voice. That's very, very difficult for parents to hear me say, I understand that this is important for you, but I need to understand that this is important for your son or daughter because they are going to be the person who has to actually go through this experience. So it's a tough experience for parents, and I try my best to help wean them from their son or daughter early in the process.
To be really, really independent, I think that's really different now. Being in higher education now, I see parents are like so involved, which can be a good thing because I wish my parents could have been involved to a certain extent. But as far as like picking out my classes and telling me what to register for, or my parents then they mailed your grades home, and my mother didn't open them, but she'd be waiting for me to open them, and then she expect me to post them on the refrigerator so it could be there for everybody to see. Now I guess parents can get the passwords, or because they pay your bills, they can say, you give me that password, I'm going to get in there and see how you're doing, kind of stuff like that. And then, I have students who I've met who said they talk to their mothers or fathers or grandmothers, whoever, their family is who's, raising them, like sometimes 3 and 4 times a day, like after every class, or calling to check and make sure they study for a test. I mean, that was just like, from my experience, that was just like unheard of, totally unheard of.
Our first generation, or our students are first generation college students, so they don't necessarily know what they're doing either, and their parents don't necessarily know what they're doing. So a lot of times I actually fall into the role of a parent in terms of helping the student with their financial aid information, helping them learn, what does this student loan mean. So I'm navigating my students through that process more so than their parents are, and with the population I work with. But there are definitely differences in terms of what the students expect. And I think the students do expect that I answer every question, that I do things for them, that they don't necessarily know that they can advocate for themselves. And that's part of my job, is to help them to learn how to navigate the system for themselves. And part of it is because a lot of students these days do rely on their parents to go through the system for them instead of teaching them how to do things. So some students say, well, I don't do my FAFSA, my mom does it for me, I don't know anything about that. And my job is to say, well, I'm going to teach you about that so that you do know about it.
We think that this increase in the connective relationship between parents and college students has deprived the students of their sense of independence. The reliance on one's parents has pushed the boundaries back so far that some may not be ready to start their own life after they finish college.